The ideas expressed in City Club forums are those of the speakers and not of the City Club of Cleveland, IdeaStream Public Media, or their sponsors. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Tuesday, January 27th. My name is Dan Moulthrop. I'm the Chief Executive here at the City Club, and I'm pleased to have all of you with us here today, and pleased to introduce today's forum, which is presented in partnership with the Jewish Federation of Cleveland. Yesterday, the Israeli military announced it had recovered the body of the last remaining hostage taken on October 7th, 2023. Indeed. Ron Gavili was killed on October 7th, and his body had been held by Hamas in Gaza since then. The recovery of Sergeant Gavili's remains marks the fulfillment of a key term in the U.S.-brokered Gaza peace plan. That plan was put into place a little more than 2 years after the tragic events of October 7th. That 20-point peace plan is complex and fragile. Hostilities continue to break out, and though aid has scaled up, many Gazans face chronic food insecurity. Despite all the uncertainty, however, progress towards a lasting peace remains the stated goals of all parties. Today we're joined by two experts who know this conflict intimately to discuss the future of this peace plan. Joining us on stage is Ahmed Al-Khatib. He leads Realign for Palestine, an Atlantic Council project that challenges entrenched narratives in the Israel and Palestine discourse. It also develops a new policy framework for rejuvenated pro-Palestine advocacy. Ahmed serves as a resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs, where he writes extensively on Gaza's political and humanitarian affairs, and is an outspoken critic of Hamas. Since the October 7th massacre, Ahmed's life has been deeply impacted by the loss of 33 of his immediate and extended family members who were killed by 3 different Israeli strikes. Joining us virtually, snowed in on the East Coast, but we're very grateful for his presence on our screens, is Michael Koplow. He's Chief Policy Officer of Israeli Policy Forum. Please give him a really loud round of applause right now so you can hear it on the East Coast. The Israeli Policy Forum, among many issues, aims to build constructive U.S. policies that help to advance a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Michael also serves as a senior research fellow with the Kogod Research Center at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. And before coming to the Israeli Policy Forum, he was the founding program director of the Israel Institute. We're very pleased to have with us to moderate our conversation today Marty Flax. She's the relatively new CEO at the Cleveland Council on World Affairs. She joined CCWA last fall. She's worked both inside and outside government during her 25-year foreign policy career. She grew up in Solon, so we're delighted to have her back in Greater Cleveland. Quick reminder for our live stream audience, if you have a question for our panelists during the Q&A portion, you can text that question to 330-541-5794. And City Club staff will work it into the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Ahmed Al-Khatib, Michael Koplow, and Marty Flax.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks to the City Club for hosting this forum. It's a really timely conversation. I appreciate you, Ahmed, being here in person, miraculously braving the weather to be here. Michael, thank you so much for zooming in and making yourself available. Given events over the last few days, and Dan just referenced them, I think this is the right time to have this conversation and assess where we are and where we go from here. And that's where I want to start. So we're about 4 months into the ceasefire agreement reached last fall after nearly 2 years of conflict that started on October 7th, 2023 with the Hamas attack on Israel. We've been in a phase 1 of that ceasefire since last fall. Both parties had certain steps they were required to take as part of that initial ceasefire. And I want to ask each of you to start out with a reflection on the last 4 months, on are you where you expected us to be at this point? what has gone well, what lags behind in terms of implementation, what still needs to be done. Maybe I'll start, Michael, with you virtually. Because of the significant milestone yesterday, the return of the remains of the last Israeli hostage, we saw really emotional scenes from Israel of people, taking off their yellow ribbons, and the count that had been going on for more than 2 years, finally coming to an end. Michael, how does that affect your assessment of implementation of the ceasefire to date, and where do we stand as of today?
Thanks, Marty, and hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but couldn't get out of my neighborhood this morning. So, and it's great to be hosted by the City Club, and always an honor to be speaking alongside Ahmed. So, yesterday was indeed a really important day for Israelis, given that under phase one of President Trump's 20-point plan, the thing that was one of the most important clauses for Israelis was the return of all the hostages. And while Ron Greeley's body remained in Gaza, obviously that was unfulfilled. And for Israelis, this really is a huge emotional milestone, particularly given how long the conflict went on and how long hostages remained, and given Israeli fears about hostages never coming back. So for Ron Greeley to come home is a big deal. And it really, I think, starkly puts into place that now phase two has to move forward. And it's not going to be easy. I'm sure we'll discuss all the various obstacles, but there are now a lot of hard choices that have to be made by all sides, by the United States, by Israel, by Hamas, by the Palestinians writ large, because while phase one, can now be said to be over, in many ways, I think phase one was the easy part. Getting to a ceasefire proved to be very difficult over 2 years of fighting, but the administration was able to do it, and was able to do it in a way that so far has been somewhat sustainable. I say somewhat because for those who follow closely, people will know that the ceasefire continues to be violated every day by both sides in different ways. But the basic contours are largely holding. And I think the question now, and this goes to the to what you asked about, what has gone expected and what hasn't. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised by where we are, which is that absent some difficult choices by both sides, things are settling into a bit of a stalemate. And while we have had, I think, important developments, first and foremost, the establishment of the NCAG, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, led by a committee of Palestinian technocrats, and that is a great development. They need room to be able to actually operate. Hamas has to be disarmed. The IDF has to further withdraw, and of course, there has to be reconstruction of Gaza and a completely new governance structure. How these things happen certainly have been envisioned by the administration, but I think putting them into place is far tougher. So, we are at a good spot in many ways in that the ceasefire is holding, and there is the opportunity to move things forward. But, as with everything, the devil's in the details, and I think that how these different parts of phase two actually get advanced is going to be very difficult.
Thanks, Michael. Ahmed, I want to ask you the same question. Looking back over this first phase, where have you seen progress in the parties fulfilling their commitments? Where are you seeing gaps in fulfilling those obligations? How do you rate kind of implementation by both parties to date?
Well, so great to be with everybody here. I share a lot of Michael's assessments as far as the return of all Israeli hostages, living and deceased. I think that's a wonderful development. I think it brings to a close a really painful and dark chapter in the Israel and Palestine conflict that really, hopefully, will initiate some level of healing in pursuit of the 1,000-mile journey of reconciliation, where I'll be honest, I'm a lot more pessimistic as far as where things have been in the past 4 months. The biggest achievement, I would say, is that in terms of the large-scale loss of life, that has stopped. We are not seeing the horrendous imagery that we were flooded with for the past 2 years. But what has happened over the last 4 months or so is that Hamas has reemerged. It has consolidated its control over the Gaza Strip. It has eliminated any resemblance of opposition. It has amassed, according to Israeli sources as well as Western intelligence cables that I've had a chance to see, up a minimum of $1 billion shekels based on the 40 to 50% taxation rate on the commercial trucks that are entering Gaza every day. We have seen kind of this the freezing, really, the paralysis, as I think, well, I'm not really supposed to say who it is, but let's just say a senior U.S. official has described the status of the ceasefire, the progression to phase 2. And granted, this is before the recovery of Ron's body yesterday and the initiation of the Board of Peace and the Technocratic Committee last week. Still, we are seeing that the administration is somewhat struggling with this idea of Hamas's disarmament. There's a disconnect between the instructions coming out of Washington, the rhetoric, the language, the plan that says Hamas will disarm. And we've seen, even there's just people going down the rabbit hole of, is it the light arms or the heavy arms, or usually when I think of the disarmament process, I think of three. It's kind of like a triangle, really. You have the heavy munitions, you have the light arms, and then you have the tunnels. Those are the three components of Hamas's arsenal. And so the administration is very clearly willing to move forward in phase 2, even if there is not full disarmament. So the Overton window is shifting. Well, it's like, well, okay, now we're going to actually do it in, not in phase 2, but now we're going to actually do the disarmament itself in phases. So I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm not trying to be negative. What I'm sharing is that everybody knows that Hamas is not going to disarm. Everybody knows that Hamas cannot afford to become just another defanged PLO, Fatah, PA without their arms. That's their whole raison d'etre. And so what are we doing with this whole charade of we know they're going to disarm? I don't care what the guys in Doha say. I don't care what Khalid Mish'al or Osama Hamdan or any of these guys in Qatar or in Turkey are saying. What I care about are the dudes in the tunnels. What I care about is Izzuddin al-Haddad, the few military wing commanders that Israel was not successful in assassinating. And those are the ones, even according to some Arab press, that are actually saying never, we will never disarm. So that's one angle. And then very briefly I want to share is that, and I've been saying this repeatedly, there are two Gazas that are emerging. There is 70 to 75% of the people who are reliant on aid, who are intense, who are cold, who are desperate, who are just spending half of their day on average trying to fetch basic means to survive. And then there is the 20 to 25% of the population that work for international NGOs, that get salaries from the Palestinian Authority, that have money else, or that were aid thieves during the war. And those folks are doing quite well. I'm not saying I'm unhappy that they're doing quite well. I'm simply saying that there is systematic and codified inequity in the standard of living right now. And part of that has been enabled by the way that the United States has, through the CMCC, the new coordination mechanism, has insisted that aid delivery happens in Gaza, whereby right now, of the roughly 500 to 700 trucks that go in daily, there's an estimated 150 to 200 that are humanitarian aid for NGOs to sustain the 70 to 75%. versus 500 to 600 that are commercial goods. Those are the ones that are going into supermarkets. Those are the ones that Hamas is taxing. And those are the ones that the 20 to 25% are living off of. So that's the structural inequity that I'm describing. So I'm very concerned about where we've been and certainly where we're heading.
So that's a great segue to kind of looking ahead. We're moving into this phase 2. That phase 2 is supposed to encompass, as both of you have referenced, local governance, a local governance body for Gaza. There's been a lot of attention around the International Board of Peace that will play, a role in Gaza. But I want you, Ahmed, first to react, and then Michael to the governance body that has been appointed of Palestinians to participate in that. What chance do they have in the context that you just referenced of continued Hamas activity, continued Israeli control over significant parts of Gaza, and to the broader context, does this body have a chance of exercising effective control and moving Gaza to a new phase of governance?
Well, I know quite a few of the names, including the chief of this body, Dr. Ali Shad. I have immense respect for them. Many of them are they're former PA folks, but they're nonpartisans. They're professionals. That's why they're technocrats. They're really decent, good people. They're from Gaza originally. Half of them have residences in Gaza. Half of them haven't been in Gaza for a long time. The issue is that they're defanged. They don't have any executive tools at their disposal. And by executive, I'm talking about, and not to get crass here, but who, and again, this is really what it comes down to, who's going to shoot violators of orders, who's going to issue the orders, who's going to shoot violators of orders, and who's going to be held liable for that. Sounds very intense and horrible. What I mean by that is simple. We want to fight crime. We want to fight the presence of armed militants in hospitals or schools. We want to institute law and order. We want to do a whole host of executive orders as the technocratic committee, and we issue orders. Do we have the authority legally, and do we feel confident that the international community, the society, is going to stand behind us? Do we have somebody to go and enforce those rules? What's the ladder of escalation to enforce those rules? Am I physically going to imprison somebody? What if do I have the authority to shoot? And then if I shoot them in a tribalist society like Gaza, what if their clan or family comes after me? The way that Hamas traditionally deals with it is Hamas rules with an iron fist. And so Hamas just shoots, and nobody questions them. But this new independent body doesn't have that kind of deterrence power. And I know, again, that sounds very crass to think about it, but that's really how, in a war-torn society that hasn't had law and order for 2 years and has been run by basically a thug operation run by remnants of Hamas, that's a challenge of them. The other thing is, this actually is a much more pressing issue that relates to the international community, is the funding challenge. How are you technically going to direct money to these guys? For example, I'm Saudi Arabia, I'm Qatar, I want to pay them. I want to pay the new employees, etc. I don't have a bank account that is optimized. I don't have the legal structure yet to be able to facilitate that. Yeah. So those are some of the challenges they're going to face.
Yeah. Michael, I want to bring you in as well on the same question of governance of Gaza, and particularly the security element. Part of this agreement is supposed to include an international stabilization force that is supposed to help provide some of the security that Ahmed referenced. Where does that stand? What's your view of the role that international actors should be playing? And then we haven't really talked about the role of the Israeli military either, and what role they should continue to play in security in Gaza in this new phase.
Again, excellent question. So let me first talk about the security aspect, and then some of the other issues around the NCAG and Palestinian governance. So on security, you highlight the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, and we haven't seen it develop yet. I was in the Civil Military Coordination Center, the CMCC, in Kiryat Gat last month, and they had all sorts of plans around the ISF. They actually even I was there for the morning briefing. They actually even threw out a date for when the ISF was going to be deployed. That date has passed, and so far we have no contributions to the ISF. Part of the problem is that what it's supposed to be doing has been somewhat unclear from the beginning. So, was the ISF supposed to just be a peacekeeping force that would be on the border and secure the border crossings and help facilitate humanitarian assistance, or was it supposed to be the body that was actually going to disarm Hamas? We've gotten different answers to that question from different administration officials at different times, and so I think what it's supposed to be doing has been unclear. If anybody watched Jared Kushner's presentation in Davos last week, the ISF was actually all of a sudden gone. He had a slide on demilitarization, and in that slide and in his remarks, he actually gave the authority for that to the NCAG and to a Palestinian force that was going to be controlled by the NCAG, this technocratic government now being run by Ali Shah. So it seems now as if maybe the ISF doesn't have a role in disarmament or even in training the Palestinian security force, two things that they were perhaps supposed to be doing. So I think it's unclear, and until that clarity is actually created, I think what it means is that Hamas is not going to be disarmed, because you can do this in a few ways. One would be for the IDF to actually go and disarm Hamas by force, something that the IDF effectively tried to do for 2.5 years of war and wasn't successful. And certainly now, it's difficult for me to see a scenario, given what the president wants and given that you have an Israeli election coming up, hard for me to see a scenario in which the IDF breaks the ceasefire completely and goes back into what's called the red zone west of the yellow line to actually disarm Hamas by force. You could have a Palestinian force do it in theory, but it's going to take years for such a force to be created, to be trained, to be equipped, to actually have the capacity and wherewithal, let alone the willpower, to go in and disarm Hamas by force. And then the other way of doing this is through what's known as DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, which is not disarming Hamas by force. It's a long process by which they give up their weapons in phases, subject to all sorts of guarantees. And that is what Jared Kushner hinted at in Davos. He didn't use the term DDR, but what he laid out was a DDR process. But even that, who are the actors that are going to actually institute it and guarantee all sorts of things, from collecting Hamas's arms to storing them to making sure that they're actually decommissioned? That also goes, the answers to those also at the moment are not clear. So, when we think about how this is going to operate in terms of disarming Hamas, we have lots of questions and we have fewer answers. And briefly on the NCAG, I think there, Ahmed lays out excellent points and raises some serious obstacles. I'll put another one on the table, which is that it's not clear to me where the NCAG is actually going to operate, because right now you have two zones in Gaza. You have the so-called green zone, which is the 53% controlled by Israel, and the so-called red zone, the 47% controlled by Hamas. I don't see any world in which Hamas is willing to actually cede control of the red zone to the NCAG. They're probably happy to let them take control of service provision and not have to deal with it, but they're certainly not going to let them run half of Gaza. And on the IDF side, hard there also to see the Israeli government agreeing to simply cede control of half of Gaza to this technocratic committee. I think that when you listen to folks in the administration, they're talking about things like planned communities on the Israeli side. When we talk about New Rafah, that's what they mean. And perhaps when New Rafah gets built, and if they can convince Palestinians to move there, you could have the NCAG run these new planned communities. But at the moment, aside from the issue of how are they going to confront Hamas, and aside from the issue of how are they actually going to be funded, Where they're actually going to have jurisdiction, I think, is also an open question. So, again, we have a lot of ideas out there. I think, some of them look like very good ideas on paper, but how you implement them still is very difficult.
Can I ask Michael a super quick question?
Sure.
Super quick question, I swear.
for it.
So on the point of NCAG, I've heard actually, I've an army of contacts in Gaza, and I've spoken to some defectors from Hamas, and there's a theory out there that matches what I've heard, a vision of some on the Trump side of the operation, which is that Hamas has its vision that NCAG will actually eventually recycle a lot of the security apparatus that Hamas has created. There's the 50,000 civil servants, of which there's roughly 25,000 or so policemen, internal security, intel, etc. Do you see a viable scenario in which somehow Hamas's fighters and former policemen are rehabilitated so they become the strike force for NCAG in Gaza, and that the U.S. and Jared Kushner would actually go for that?
It's possible that that the administration would go for that. We have the example of the U.S. and Iraq post 2003, right, where there was this idea of complete de-Ba'athification, and at the time, a lot of people were skeptical, and I think that almost everybody would say in hindsight that did not work. And so if you look at that, then that would point to a conclusion that I do think some of the administration are coming to, which is, let's not replicate that, and let's indeed integrate all aspects of Hamas, including fighters under certain conditions, into future governance. I will say that I am skeptical of that wholesale approach. I think integrating Hamas bureaucrats is one thing. Integrating Hamas fighters is another thing, and it isn't just about what the administration wants, right? As you know well, Ahmed, you're going to have a lot of folks in the PA who are also deeply skeptical of this idea, particularly in the PA security forces, that you just take Hamas fighters who have been effectively at war with the PA now for a decade and a half, and just integrate them into a Palestinian security force. And certainly the Israelis are going to look at that with deep skepticism. And for any future government in Gaza to survive, they're going to have a decent working relationship with the Israelis. And how you have that if Hamas fighters, even Nukhba fighters, are sitting there as part of quote unquote reformed Palestinian security forces, it's very difficult for me to envision. And so, if I were the administration, what I would be doing is trying as best as I could to drive a serious wedge between the Hamas bureaucracy, which we may not like, but I think has to have some sort of future in Gaza governance if it's going to work, versus the hardcore ideological Hamas fighters who I don't think can have a role if Gaza is going to be successful.
Yeah, so we're going to move in a few minutes to audience questions, but let me ask you both one more question. You've laid out a myriad of things that need to happen in Gaza: governance, security, humanitarian, we just barely touched on. There is a lot going on in the world right now. And this conflict was kind of above the fold news for so long. It's now kind of fallen out of the headlines until very recently in the last few days. And maybe that's a good thing. You all can weigh in if you think that's actually helpful in some ways. But with all of the competing priorities, both internationally and domestically, that this administration faces, what is it going to take, and what do you want to see from the U.S. government in terms of attention, engagement, resources to make this new arrangement work, or give it the best chance of being successful? What's the effort required, and do you see the U.S. government having the bandwidth to invest that time and resources, given everything happening in the world? Maybe Ahmed, and then over to Michael.
I would argue, in some regards, it's negative that it doesn't receive attention. I'll get to that in a second. But maybe one of the few positive things is that a lot of the so-called activists and the pro-Palestine voices that have sucked the oxygen out of the room are kind of nowhere to be found. And I actually find that really helpful, because those young voices are not helpful. I had hopes for them to actually learn and grow and be harnessed into something constructive, but unfortunately, that was not the case. As far as the administration, appreciate the efforts. I appreciate a lot of, I appreciate a lot of the individuals and the intentions that are behind what they're trying to do. I'm immensely concerned that there is a level of naivete on a few levels, particularly when it comes to the mere idea that somehow Gaza is going to be de-radicalized and quote unquote fixed by the introduction of raw capitalism and this massive, beachside property, beachfront, this and fancy slides, and let's have McKinsey and Boston Consulting and all the. And by the way, I'm a capitalist. I love capitalism. I'm not against capitalism. I'm simply saying that capitalism that is not accompanied by a whole host of other changes to the social, societal infrastructure, the social contract, the educational system, even Gaza's geopolitical identity. Gaza's, I actually see a lot of opportunities right now because of the sheer pain and the sheer suffering, and I actually think now is a time that it's kind of like a blank portrait, as painful as that sounds, and as horrendous as the last 2 years have been, to actually start putting back the pieces together to help the Palestinian people put it back together in a meaningful, deliberate way, so that it's not just creating crony capitalism and the oligarchy class that we see in the West Bank that's concentrated around the Palestinian Authority, that has created the very corruption that we keep saying we need the Palestinian Authority to reform, to address the corruption. So that's one thing that I am pleading with the current administration to try to be cognizant of. The other thing is that we need less things for Secretary Rubio to be on, like he has way too many roles and things that he signed on to, so we need dedicated staff and infrastructure. And what that means is, unfortunately, some of the workforce at state that hasn't been replenished, a lot of the infrastructure that was gutted at USAID. You may have your own feelings about USAID. I'm not here to talk politics. I'm simply saying it is a fact that USAID had robust post-conflict infrastructure that wasn't just about handing out bags of flour or food, but it was about actually building resilience and preparing the infrastructure for governance, et cetera. So that's one thing, is to figure out how can we help surge capacity. Another thing that I would caution the administration is to truly register the regional dynamics that are at play. For example, when it comes to ISF, I don't want Turkish troops in Gaza. I think that's very dangerous. The neo-Ottoman aspirations are very real. Gaza fell in 1917 in a battle between the Ottoman Empire and the British. And so there's this belief among some in Turkey that we're going to reclaim the new Ottoman Empire by coming back to Turkey. That is very real. They speak about it. So Turkey, Qatar, the rift between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Lastly, I hope that, and I had high hopes for the Board of Peace being something that is very narrowed and focused. And I'm very alarmed by the distraction that it has become, with inviting Lukashenko and Putin and some of the others, and you want $1 billion for permanent membership, and I think it was a brilliant idea that could have been kind of that could have been the trigger for transformation in Gaza, and it is no longer that.
Thanks. Michael, over to you. What would you like to see the U.S. government doing at this point?
I also appreciate the effort that the administration is putting in, and I particularly appreciate that they're throwing ideas out there. They're hoping something will stick. They're trying to solve the problem as opposed to just throwing up their hands and saying it can't be done, or trying to simply manage things. So I certainly appreciate all of that. And if we want to point to specific things that they're doing that I think are positive and I'd like to see more of, I agree with Ahmed. The Board of Peace seems like it's a separate fiasco. But under the guise of the Board of Peace, they appointed Nikolai Mladenov as I think his title is high executive for Gaza. And he's somebody who has worked with Israelis and Palestinians, is trusted by both, knows the UN system, knows things on the ground, and so putting someone like that as the point person, I think, is a great move. With all of that said, the administration, to my mind, is ignoring politics, and I think anyone does that at their own peril. They're ignoring the politics on the Israeli side, in particular, where you have an Israeli election coming up. It has to take place by October of this year. I think it's likelier to take place a bit earlier than October. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is effectively going to run on a message that he and only he will prevent any sort of future Palestinian entity from emerging. He and only he will prevent any future unification of Gaza and the West Bank. That's going to be his main campaign message, because he can't run on security anymore, and he's deeply unpopular with a majority of Israelis. That's going to be his message, and that runs up against everything the Trump administration is trying to do. And I don't see from the administration enough of a recognition that these are the dynamics in Israel. On the Palestinian side, too, Ahmed talks about the corruption within the PA, which is very real. And the administration talks about PA reform and bringing the PA back to Gaza, but I don't see a whole lot of effort on their part to actually get on top of PA politics. When they say PA reform, so what does that look like for them? They should lay out a specific program that goes beyond things like pay to slay, the prisoner and martyr payments. They should say precisely what they want to see, and they should hold the PA to that if there's going to be any future PA role. When they talk about getting regional actors involved, they don't seem to recognize that here, what happens in the West Bank impacts Gaza. You simply cannot have Israeli policies continue in the West Bank as they are on everything from settler violence to what is absolutely de facto annexation in ways that are unprecedented in Israeli history. You can't let that continue and hope that at some point the Saudis and others will come in and say, we're willing to cooperate with the Israelis, even though they are destroying any hope for future Palestinian governance in the West Bank. So I think on all of these fronts, the administration wants to push forward as if the politics don't exist, and the politics very much do exist and they're real. And until they acknowledge that and bring a lot more pressure to bear on everybody here to get into line with their view and to do what they can to override the political wins, then I think we're going to keep on talking about a situation where there are lots of nice ideas on the table, but very few of them can actually be implemented and overcome the political headwinds.
Well, thank you both. I could ask a lot more questions, but I'm going to let our audience have a chance to ask questions. So we are going to begin our audience Q&A. For those just joining via our live stream audience, I'm Marty Flax. I'm the CEO of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs and moderator for today's conversation. We're talking here about the state of the ceasefire and prospects for lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. Joining me on stage is Ahmed Al-Khatib, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Director at Realign for Palestine. And joining virtually from the East Coast is Michael Koplow, Chief Policy Officer at the Israel Policy Forum. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, and those joining via the live stream at cityclub.org. If you'd like to text a question, please text it to 330-541-5794, and the City Club staff will try to work it into the program. So now we will turn to our first question, please.
My question is twofold. Number one, the history didn't start on October 7th. And I think we keep making that mistake talking about as if things did not exist before that caused the problem. Number two, we are paying a lot of attention to Gaza, but what's happening in West Bank, nobody's talking about. Their settler violence has increased dramatically. The problems that exist in West Bank, we're going to carry them over into Gaza. So you cannot solve one problem by ignoring the other problem, when they are going to eventually have to deal with it together.
Certainly.
Wanna start
May
on-
I start
Yeah.
that? And Michael, I'll give you the second one. But I mean, thank you for that question. I mean, I hear that point over and over and over. And on the one hand, it is, on the surface, it is absolutely valid. Like, of course, this didn't start on October 7th. My parents and grandparents were displaced in 1948. Well, half of them were displaced and the other half fled. But I lived in Gaza. I experienced the violence and the issues. I experienced the hope of Oslo. I experienced the violence of the Second Intifada. Like, I very much so understand also the issue of the 2005 disengagement or the withdrawal of Israeli settlements and the subsequent blockade that came onto Gaza because of Hamas's rise to power, because of the various actions. On the other hand, I think and I'm not saying this about you, sir, per se, I'm saying this in general. The context in which this point is always brought up is always diversionary, and if that's even a word, I just made it up. It's always meant as a diversion, that's more accurate, to deny the fact that within the imbalance of power dynamics that exists between Israel up here and Palestinians down here, believe it or not, there actually does exist some space within this imbalance for Palestinian agency and responsibility and accountability, such that October 7th was a choice. It was a decision, not by all Palestinians, not by the Palestinian people, not even by Palestinian leadership, by a small, fascistic, despicable, small circle of Palestinians, Sinwar and Leif of Hamas, who dragged 2.3 million Palestinian people hostage to a suicidal adventure that they knew would trigger an overwhelming reaction against the Gaza Strip, that they knew was poking the most far-right, and I'm going to go even a step further, fascistic government in Israel's history. What did they expect to happen? So that was a choice. That was a deliberate decision. My family would still be alive if Hamas had simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th. And so would 70,000 plus Palestinians. And Gaza would not be where it is. We would not even be in this room if Hamas had simply kept its soldiers at home on that day. You want to effectuate the circumstances of Gaza? You want to undo the blockade? You want to change the circumstances? You have choices. Hamas right now, at least ostensibly, is saying, where we're willing to disarm, where we're willing to, some of us, leave Gaza and whatever, and just become a political party. Imagine if on October 7th, instead of launching the single worst day attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, Hamas came out and actually said, you know, actually we want to try, we're going to be a political group, and we're going to disarm, and we're going to join the political process, and we're going to run in elections and do this politically. Just imagine the headlines and all the insanity, and Netanyahu going like, oh my God, there goes my career, there goes my life, you know what that would have done to Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all of those people? So that's my point, brother, is yes, Israel, there are grievances, historical grievances that the Palestinian people have with the state of Israel that I've experienced. I'm deaf in my left ear because of an Israeli bombing that killed 2 of my friends and almost killed me. And that's why I always seem like I'm yelling. I'm not yelling. I can't hear myself as well. So as part of my natural regulation, I'm loud. So that's my point, is that part of my work, part of what propelled me to put myself out there is to say, no, I don't accept the thesis that says And I'm sorry, here's another thing.
Make sure we get to a few more questions.
Yes, I swear, but this one is really this, like Gaza, people saying Gaza was a concentration camp, an open air jail, the worst. Gaza was Auschwitz before October 7th. Baloney. Gaza before October 7th, as much as it had horrendous suffering. My mom and my brother and my siblings were living in Gaza before. We lost our homes. We lost both of our homes. Khalas, everything is done in Gaza. Gaza, before October 7th, if you compare it to Yemen or to Sudan or to parts of western Iraq or eastern Syria, it's a 5-star luxury hotel. Gaza had the most amount of foreign aid investment in it. Gaza had luxury hotels. Gaza had malls that went into it. I'm not saying everybody was well off. I'm saying there's multiple truths. There was suffering, but Gaza was actually experiencing a renaissance. And with different choices, it could have become something else. As far as what happens in the West Bank, I speak about it all the time. And Michael, I want you to just, if you want to or not, to say something. But of course, what's happening in the West Bank is horrendous. Of course, what's happening in there is that's what Michael just said. De facto annexation, the elimination of the prospect of the Palestinian state. But my second, and I shared this earlier, my second theory of change, I have two theories of change. One was that within the imbalance of power, there's space for Palestinian agency and accountability. The second theory of change is that I'm a believer in a Gaza first model, which is that nothing good happens in the West Bank. In my opinion, you're welcome to not believe in this, but because of what Hamas did, 20 years were wasted since the 2005 withdrawal of Israeli settlements. We have to actually work extra hard at making Gaza a success story so that we prove that the West Bank, occupation-free, will not be Gaza 2.0. That Gaza can actually be an example of successful Palestinian self-governance and a role model for prosperity and not a den of violence and terrorism.
Ahmed, thank you for reminding us also the human element of all this and that these are people like yourself who are impacted every single day by the violence. I think what we're going to do is let's bring in one more question. And Michael, I'll come to you if you want to revisit. You spoke about the West Bank earlier. If you want to say a little more about that, you're welcome to. But let's get our next question first.
Yeah, first, thanks for the very frank discussion today. We're talking about, and you again said, what if? I always worry about that. The present generation, the people in power, the people doing these things are not going to change. So what are we all doing to try to get the next generation, the Jewish community, the new upcoming Jewish generation, Palestinian generation, how are we teaching them to communicate, to understand each other? Because if we don't get it done in 2026, we need to start thinking about the next 5-10 years. So what can we do? Thanks.
Thank you. Michael, what can we do?
I'll take this opportunity to do some organizational plugging, which is that my organization, Israel Policy Forum, has a very robust young leadership initiative called IPF Atid. We have chapters in 7 different cities. Had I been able to fly to Cleveland, I was going to be speaking at the opening of the Cleveland chapter of Atid last night. And what we have found is that it's a fantastic way of trying to inculcate that next generation of American Jewish leadership. And we do it by focusing everything around difficult questions and policy discussions and really delving into substance. And so what all of our Atid chapters and our Atid participants, and we have chapters in different cities, we have fellowships, we have all sorts of programming. I think we had 3,000, I think the number is 3,000 people come to Atid programming in the last year alone. What we do with all of them is give people substance to discuss, whether it's the policy reports we put out or whether it's simulations that they hold on their own. But the idea, we shouldn't be shying away from the hard questions or the hard topics. And the more that people actually discuss the substantive issues as opposed to just yelling at each other, the better off we will be. And we have people, for those of you who know the the Jewish ecosphere well. We have participants that really span the entire array of Zionist organizations and Zionist groups in this country. People from everything from J Street all the way over to Stand With Us on the right, and it really works. And I hope that if we get away from some of the more toxic conversations and we instead really try to examine what's going on the ground and think about what the solutions can be, then not only can we have a better conversation about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but we can also have the next generation of American Jewish leaders who are really prepared to tackle it in a substantive and helpful way.
Yeah, I'll just give a kudos also to City Club. I know schools are closed today, but normally we also have a lot of students in this room, and I think coming to forums like this is so valuable for young people to hear different perspectives and also ask their questions and engage. So thank you to City Club for always having students here. Let's go to our next question.
Well, first of all, thank you for such an honest and respectful conversation. And thanks also for recognizing USAID. I have friends who spent years of their lives doing post-conflict work, and they were devastated when that ended. And so my question, thinking of all of the pain and the suffering, all of the complexities you've described, on a more personal level, when you look to the solution, what might be your highest hope, your deepest dream? It might be in your thoughts, in your heart, in your prayers. What is something you see that the solution might look like? If we could get beyond all the complexities you described so well. Thank you.
Great question, Ahmed, and then I'll come to Michael.
I'll share it super brief because I'm known for being very brief. Not verbose at all. I don't go on for long at all. Not known for that. What I shared this earlier at the Federation this morning. What sustains me is I started the first question, the first answer. I was like, oh, I'm going to be more negative than Michael. Oh, like it's horrible. But I actually do have. What sustains me is there's a window, there's a change on the ground in Gaza that is very different than in the diaspora Arab, Muslim, Palestinian community. There's a disconnect in the discourse. Like the people of Gaza, precisely because of their pain and their suffering, and because they see the war in the context of the totality of 20 years of failed Hamas leadership and wars and destruction and just kind of a generation lost, a people in waiting. They're finally actually appreciating, they're like, no, we want something different. So I see a fertile soil for a new school of thought, a new approach to life. I actually think with a little bit of time, a little bit of hand-holding, a little bit of support, Gaza can and will be a beautiful, truly beautiful place. And no, I don't mean is this live online? Okay. Well, I don't mean the type that expensive consulting groups that present at Davos do. I'm just saying that it's the kind that Palestinians are going to be proud of. I want Gaza to be the pride and joy of the Palestinian people. I want it to be what are we define? I want us to move away from the resistance narrative to the nation-building narrative in pursuit of the coexistence narrative. And you see there's a deliberate sequencing there, because just being against Hamas doesn't make someone immediately for peace or pro-Israel or Zionist or whatever. And that's fine, but there's a journey there. So I see that as number one. Number two is I actually think Gaza's future is bright. I think Gaza's future can and will be very, very, very promising. It's just that I worry that is it going to be, is it, what I care about more than the fancy buildings and I don't care as much, the reconstruction is important. But what the optimistic outcome is not a reconstruction of buildings and material. It's the reconstitution of the entirety of the strip Palestinian identity in there, the mindset, the approach. 2/3 of Gazans are considered, they consider themselves refugees. They're descendants of refugees. I want that to change. I'm sorry. Like, halas, there's no going back to mainland Israel. There's no more millions of Palestinians are going to return. The right of return, it's symbolic. We can have an acknowledgement, truth and healing and reconciliation. But the right of return, as it has historically been defined, so things like that, those things I actually see right now, this moment, is ripe for the reconfiguration of Gaza. Not just because the population is traumatized, not just because of the consequences of October 7th, but because the totality of the last 77 years, but especially the last 2 decades. So that gives me immense hope. That gives me a lot of optimism that the future is bright. And I'm sorry, but no amount of students at Columbia University or Harvard or Yale or whatever fancy schools in London or Oxford are going to deter me from continuing to express that. That's why I put myself out there. And believe me, it's not glorious. I get attacked, I get mauled out there by crowds, but so be it, because I believe in this work. Michael, last word.
Thank you. You're an excellent moderator.
October 7th was obviously a heat shock to the Israeli system. And it wasn't just about the 1,200 Israelis who were killed and the 255 who were abducted to Gaza. It was also a shock to the Israeli determination that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could be managed basically until the end of time. Israelis right now, they went from thinking that the conflict could be managed and having that burst in a terrible way on October 7th, to then thinking that the solution could be fantasies that were being bandied about, such as expelling all Palestinians from Gaza and having the Israelis just take it over. And I think that for many Israelis who may have believed that, it's now becoming clear that that can't happen either. And what that means is that Israelis, I think, are starting to have a better understanding that just as they are never going to go anywhere, neither are the Palestinians. And there's going to have to be some sort of way of living alongside them and figuring out what that looks like for the next 5, 10, 20, 100, hopefully 1,000 years. And there's going to be, as I said, an Israeli election this year. I'm relatively confident that the government that emerges will be different from this one. I think that no matter what government gets formed, it's likely not to include Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich. And that means that even if you have an Israeli government that is still right of center, and let's remember, Israelis themselves are still right of center. They were before October 7th. They're even more so now. It still provides an opportunity to try and reset things and figure out how these two people are going to move forward in a way that Israelis can actually live with and conceive of in a realistic way. And that means that I think inevitably there will be progress. And is it going to look like the way people like me would have thought it would look like 5 years ago or even on October 6, 2023? No, the whatever emerges, and I still hope that what emerges is a Palestinian state alongside Israel. It's going to look very different from what we thought it was going to look like 3 years ago. But I'm still hopeful that some sort of political solution that respects the legitimate national rights and hopes and sovereignty and security of both peoples will happen. And the question for me is not whether that's what we should be working toward, but how we should be working toward it and what we can do to put that in place. And I think that Israelis and Palestinians are going to get there as well.
Many thanks to Marty Flax, Ahmed Al-Khatib, and especially Michael Koplow for joining us remotely today here at the City Club of Cleveland. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like all of you, and you can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. A special note, our partners at J Street will be hosting a debrief and facilitated discussion about this forum and everything that you heard and every other question that we didn't actually get to. That's going to happen next Tuesday at 6 p.m. If you'd like more, it's going to happen on Zoom. If you'd like more information, you can email us info@cityclub.org, and we'll forward it along to J Street, and they'll get in touch with you. So that's next Tuesday, 6 p.m. on Zoom. More information by emailing us at the City Club. Coming up, also we'd like to welcome guests at tables hosted by the ADL, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland, and J Street. Thank you all for being here, and a special thanks to our friends of the Federation who helped make today's forum possible. On Friday, January 30th, we will learn how the city of Omaha reduced gun violence by 50% in 5 years. It's a big deal. You should come and hear about it. And there's plenty more forums on the website right now, cityclub.org. Many more we're scheduling all the time. Please check it out. And thank you all so much. Please stay warm this week and check in on people who you think may need checking in on. Thank you. Have a great day. This forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
The ideas expressed in City Club forums are those of the speakers and not of the City Club of Cleveland, IdeaStream Public Media, or their sponsors. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.